The spiritual significance of a man paralyzed for 38 years. John 5 verse 5. A man was there who had been paralyzed for 38 years. At the pool of mercy, Bethesda, there lay a paralytic who had been incurable for 38 years, in agony, waiting for a chance to be healed. This paralytic, who had been practically dead for 38 years, resembled the Israelites. The ancient Israelites were freed from slavery in Egypt, embarked on the Exodus, crossed the Red Sea, and traveled through the Sinai Peninsula for 2 years and 2 months until they reached Ganesh Barnea, where the promised land of Canaan was visible in the distance. From there, they could enter the land of Canaan just a few days further. Moses sent 12 spies into Canaan to scout out the land for 40 days and return. The spies explored every nook and cranny of Canaan. The 12 spies saw fertile land, abundant crops, and a prosperous life. They also encountered the descendants of Anak, giants, the tallest people in Canaan. They possessed superior military weapons and were well-trained soldiers. And the city they lived in was an impregnable fortress. The spies were terrified when they saw this. The moment the Israelites entered Canaan, they felt they would all perish without even being able to fight the Canaanite army. 10 of the 12 spies, the vast majority of them, were terrified by the sight of the giant Canaanite army and reported that they could never enter Canaan. The moment we enter Canaan, we will be annihilated without even fighting. After hearing the spies' words, the Israelites cried out, "It would be better to die in the wilderness," and they rebelled against Moses and God, distrusting them. As a result, they wandered in the wilderness for another 38 years. Of the men 20 years old and older who left Egypt, all but Joshua and Caleb perished in the wilderness. God intended to free the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, lead them through the wilderness, across the Jordan River, and into Canaan, the promised land, where they could live freely, abundantly, and prosperously. However, they were caught up in the fear of their circumstances, unable to trust in God, and fell into the trap of that fear. This is an important lesson for our lives. God has promised to give His people freedom, peace, and happiness. To enjoy this promise, we must not be distracted by what we see, but rely entirely on God, trust, and move forward boldly. The consistent principles of the Bible are to enjoy the freedom, peace, and happiness God gives us. We must overcome Satan's deception. If Adam had overcome Satan's temptation, he would not have lost everything God gave him, and there would have been no pain, suffering, or death. Consistent from Genesis to Revelation. This principle also applied to the Israelites. However, like Adam, they succumbed to Satan's temptation and wandered in the wilderness for another 38 years before dying. This same principle applies to us today. Satan is always before our eyes, trying to deceive, delude, and instill fear in us. Through our visible circumstances, Satan seeks to bind us with fear, the seemingly impossible, anxiety, worry, and concern, leaving us unable to move, causing us pain. When we boldly challenge these satanic deceptions, believing in God's promises, we can break free from all of Satan's snares and enjoy the freedom, peace, and blessings that the Lord gives. This is illustrated by the story of the 10 spies and the 2 others, Joshua and Caleb. Joshua and Caleb, like the other 10 spies, saw everything. The tall descendants of Anak, the most advanced military equipment, well-trained soldiers, and impregnable fortresses. However, the reports of these 2 spies were diametrically opposed to those of the 10. These 2 spies said, "What those 10 men said is true, but they are our prey. We will enter the land of Canaan, as God promised, and we will be victorious in the Canaan wars and possess it." Look, the 12 men saw the same thing. So why are their thoughts so completely different? It's all about faith. 10 men were completely captivated by what they saw and became slaves to fear. However, 2 men transcended their visible circumstances and placed their faith in God's work. These 2 spies focused their thoughts on God and believed in His power, who had brought plagues upon Egypt, the world's mightiest nation, liberated them from slavery, parted the impossibly difficult Red Sea, destroyed the Egyptian army in the Red Sea, and fed them during their 2 years and 2 months of untiring wilderness journey without farming or any other toil. Was the amazing work of God I just mentioned only experienced by Joshua and Caleb? No, it wasn't. Didn't the 10 spies and all the Israelites who heard their stories experience it together? They all experienced it. So why could things be so different? Despite experiencing God's work, they were captivated by what they saw and became slaves to fear. They were freed from Egypt, crossed the Red Sea, and survived, but the moment they saw fear, they became paralyzed, unable to move, lying trembling. This is because they focused only on what they could see, rather than on the absolute, omnipotent God who transcends all things. We too have received salvation and become God's people, and have experienced God working in our lives for a long time. Nevertheless, if the circumstances facing us seem impossible, if we feel fearful, anxious, or overwhelmed by worry and anxiety, we too become like the disobedient Israelites. We become like the paralytic here. The Jews, who claim to be God's chosen people and believe in God, do not truly understand the meaning of God's words or the true meaning of His laws. They delude themselves into thinking that they can keep the laws and that their actions are greater than God's perfect love and grace. They refuse to accept the Messiah of salvation, which is God's will, and they show themselves to be in opposition to God. This is the same as the current paralyzed man who, though God's people, is not whole, is lying paralyzed and dying. This paralyzed man's 38 years of suffering corresponds to the 38 years the disobedient Israelites wandered in the wilderness and died. Even in Jesus' time, long after their exodus from Egypt, the Jews were living lives unchanged from those of their disobedient ancestors in the wilderness. What is our Christian life like?